the Toastmaster. As I sat in Gloucester Cathedral some years ago in the west of England, in a gorgeous area known as the Severn, the River Severn Valley, there was a plaque on the wall devoted to one of the great heroes of England and to the New World, to the Free World, to William Wilburforce. Some of you may have heard his story or seen the movie Amazing Grace. And I think the underlying message about William Wilburforce was expressed actually by Billy Graham in one of his talks when he said, "Never give up." Now, Wilburforce was a nobleman from the upper classes of England in the middle 1700s, a time when England was on the rise and the Empire of England was spreading throughout the world. And of course, among their possessions and territorial areas was the West Indies. And in the West Indies, there were probably in the order of 3 to 4 million what we call African Americans or Negroes enslaved in British farming. They were raising tobacco, but primarily sugarcane. And the noblemen in the Houses of Parliament and the Houses of Lords and Commons were not about to give up their cherished, wonderful farms in the West Indies and to some degree in Africa. And along came Wilburforce, who saw the evil in slavery like no one else in Parliament. And he rose as a single man, excoriated by his peers, renounced, because he said slavery is wrong. Mankind can no longer grow and civilization cannot prosper in the future if we continue to indulge in this horrific, unchristian, and ungodly way of life in our empire. And he put bills before Parliament 17 times in an effort to overturn the rule of land and the rule of law in the English Parliament and the English government. And after the 17th vote, he was finally successful in getting enough support to overturn slavery in the British Empire. And this all came about 100 years before the American Revolution. And Wilburforce was, in fact, one of Abraham Lincoln's great leaders. Lincoln had read about him, and Lincoln idolized him. Now, there was one other man who played into this, who was a contemporary of Wilburforce, by the name of John Newton. And I have been to Newton's home in Montrose in Scotland, which was a departure point for the slave ships. They would go down the North Sea, pick up goods in Lower England, sell them off in France, and then go on to Africa, pick up slaves and bring them all the way across the Atlantic, and then come back to England and ultimately to Scotland. And this man, John Newton, was one of the leading sea captains in the height of the nautical empire of England, and made fortunes for many people out of slavery. And crossing the Atlantic to come back home in 1787, his ship ran into a tremendous storm, much like the perfect storm. And he saw that his ship was to be swamped, that he and his crew would perish. He got on his knees to God Almighty, and he prayed to God that if he would save his ship and save his men, he would never be a slave trader again in all his life. And he ultimately renounced his position in the slave trade, and he wrote a song that we've all sung since childhood, Amazing Grace. And so Wilburforce and Newton had the greatest impact in Western civilization on changing the culture and the social world as we know it. And they set the stage for what was to come later with the John C. Calhouns and the abolition movement in America, which ultimately culminated in the Civil War, or as I like to call it, the War of Independence for the black people in the Western world. And I thank God today that I know about this story and I'm able to live in a world where all of this is behind us and where all men, regardless of color or race or creed, have a right to equal freedom. Freedom of choice of how they live, freedom to worship as they wish, and the freedom to bring up their children in a civilization where they have equal chance to survive and where there is no bias. And so, as I close, I'd like to say that I think the hymn, Amazing Grace, should be put to words in all of our homes and perhaps put on a plaque somewhere hanging in our house, so that our children, as they grow up, can come to understand the tremendous miracle and the change for the better of mankind that came about because of the life of William Wilburforce. Thank you.